My name is Joanna Briggs. I am 32 years old. And 2 years ago, on a Saturday in June, that my father had circled on his calendar for 11 months, I sat in my car in the parking lot of a hotel ballroom in Macon, Georgia, and wrote out a card in my best handwriting. The card said, "Congratulations on 30 years of service, Dad. I hope the party is everything you imagined." I signed it with my name, sealed it in the envelope I had addressed the week before, and drove to the post office and mailed it from 3 miles away while the party was happening without me. I had been invited. I had RSVP'd, yes. I had bought a dress. I had made a reservation at the hotel for the night so I would not have to drive home afterward. I had done all of those things because I am the kind of person who does what she says she will do, and because I had genuinely believed right up until approximately 48 hours before the event that I was going to walk into that room and smile and hug my father and hand him a gift and mean it. What happened 48 hours before is what I need to tell you about. But to tell you that, I need to go back much further. I need to go back to a Saturday in May 17 years earlier when my father was supposed to be sitting in the third row of the auditorium at Mercer University, watching me walk across the stage to collect the degree I had worked 4 years to earn, and was instead sitting in the bleachers of a minor league ballpark in Savannah, watching my brother pitch the fourth inning of a game that did not determine anything and that nobody outside of 112 people would remember by the following Tuesday. Before I tell you all of it, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if this story earns it. Drop your city and your local time in the comments below. I want to know who is listening tonight. Now let me take you back to Macon, Georgia, where I grew up, and to the specific, quiet, comprehensive way that a family can fail someone without ever technically doing anything wrong. Macon, Georgia, a city of just over 150,000 people in the geographic center of the state, where the summers are long and genuinely humid, and the dogwoods bloom in March, and the high school football games on Friday nights are attended with the kind of civic seriousness that suggests people understand on some level that the Friday game is the event around which the rest of the week is organized. I grew up on Caldwell Drive in a 3-bedroom ranch house with a carport and a backyard that was mostly crabgrass by the time I was 10 years old, and my father had stopped keeping up with it. My father, Raymond Briggs, worked for 30 years as a regional sales manager for an agricultural equipment company that supplied dealers across Georgia, Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle. He drove a lot. He was gone Monday through Thursday most weeks for the first 15 years of my life, home on weekends. Present in the specific and limited way of a man who is trying to make a career work and who has decided that his family will understand, this is what the career requires. My mother, Ellen, taught fourth grade at an elementary school 8 minutes from the house and managed everything that my father's absence required someone to manage, which was a great deal. She managed it without complaint and without making us feel the weight of it, which I did not appreciate fully until I was an adult and looked back at the arithmetic of what she had done and understood what it had cost her. I was the older child by 3 years. My brother Derek came along in the spring of my third year, and from his earliest days had the specific quality of a child who is extremely easy to organize a household around. He was loud and physical and enthusiastic and demanded constant engagement from the adults in his vicinity, and the adults in his vicinity provided it. Because Derek was the kind of child who made you feel useful in the particular way of children who know exactly what they want and communicate it with the full force of their personality, he wanted to play ball. All gone furs and short that an active ball, from the time he was 4 years old throwing a rubber ball against the garage door to the time he was 12, and had been identified by his travel team coach as having genuine potential. Derek's athletic life was the organizing principle around which much of the Briggs family's weekend schedule was built. Games, practices, tournaments in other cities that required hotel stays, showcases attended by college scouts when Derek was 15, and the potential had become something more specific and more serious. I want to be careful here because I have been careful about this for a long time, and I have not always gotten it right, and I want to get it right now. I am not going to tell you that Derek's baseball was wrong, or that my parents were wrong to support it, or that a family rallying around a child's genuine talent is a failure of parenting. None of that is true. Derek was genuinely talented, he worked genuinely hard. He earned the support he received, in the sense that the support was a response to something real that he was doing, and not simply a preference based on who he was. What I am going to tell you is what happened to me inside all of that, because what happened to me inside all of that was also real, and it has taken me a long time to say so out loud. I was a reader, I was a student. From the time I was 7 years old, and my mother brought home a library card for me on a Tuesday afternoon and walked me through the children's section of the Macon-Bibb County Public Library and told me I could take home any 6 books I wanted. I had been the kind of child who disappeared into books and emerged, knowing things she had not known before and hungry for more things to know. By 5th grade, I was reading at a high school level. By middle school, I had developed a specific interest in biology and chemistry that my science teachers encouraged because I was the student who asked the questions they liked answering. I was not a prodigy. I was not exceptional in the way that gets you into magazines or makes adults say she is going to be someone. I was the steady kind of excellent, the kind that accumulates quietly over years and produces results that are real without being spectacular, and that are easy to take for granted because they do not require anyone to make a special trip. My father was not absent from my life in the way that some fathers are absent. He was there. He came to school events when he could. He asked about my grades and was proud of them in the way he was proud of things that confirmed a narrative he already held about his family. He was not cruel. He was not intentionally withholding. He was simply more interested in Derek than he was in me in the specific and apparently unconsidered way that some parents are more interested in one child than another. And he did not examine this interest closely enough to understand what it was costing the other child. What it was costing me was not dramatic, and not the kind of thing that produces visible wounds. It was the cost of being consistently allocated the smaller portion of the available attention, over years, until the smaller portion began to feel like the correct portion, and the correct portion began to feel like what I deserved. My mother saw it. I understood this only in retrospect. She saw it and compensated for it in the patient daily way she compensated for things that she could not directly address. Extra time with me in the evenings, questions about my reading, genuine interest in the things I was learning, a quality of attention that was not spectacular but was consistent and warm and mine. She could not fix what my father was doing because what my father was doing was not a single fixable thing. It was a pattern, and patterns do not respond to single interventions. They require the person at the center of them to see them, and my father did not see it. I applied to Mercer University in the fall of my senior year of high school and was accepted in December with a partial merit scholarship that covered about 30% of tuition. I took out student loans for the rest. I did not ask my parents to help with the financing because I had done the math on that conversation the way I did the math on most things, and it did not produce a good outcome. Derek was a sophomore in high school by then, and his travel team fees and equipment costs and tournament travel were ongoing and substantial. And I understood that the family's financial attention was organized the same way the family's emotional attention was organized, and I was not going to fight for a portion of something that had already been allocated. I would manage it myself. I was good at managing things myself. It was one of the skills I had developed in the smaller portion years. Mercer was in Macon, which meant I was 20 minutes from home, which meant I saw my parents regularly and ate Sunday dinner at the house on Caldwell Drive once or twice a month and stayed connected to the family in a way that I think, looking back, was good for my mother and gave my father the opportunity to express the interest he occasionally remembered to express. He came to my freshman orientation. He came to a campus event in my sophomore year when the biology department hosted an open house and I had work displayed. He asked reasonable questions and seemed genuinely interested, and I was glad he had come. These were the moments I held on to, the ones I used to argue against the accumulating evidence of the other moments. In my junior year, I was selected for a summer research fellowship at Emory University in Atlanta, working in a cellular biology lab on a project that I was not important enough to be on the paper for, but that I learned from enormously and that set the direction of my academic interests for the next several years. I told my parents about it at Sunday dinner in April, the week after I found out. My mother said, "That is wonderful, Joanna, that is a real achievement," and asked me several specific questions about what the research involved. My father said that sounds like a great opportunity and went back to talking with Derek about the upcoming showcase tournament in Augusta. It was a Sunday dinner. It was one moment. I am not recounting it to catalog grievances. I am recounting it because it is an example of the texture of things, and the texture of things is what I am trying to describe. My senior year was the most important academic year of my life to that point. I was completing a thesis on cellular membrane dynamics that my advisor had encouraged me to pursue applying to graduate programs in biology, at 6 universities, maintaining the GPA that kept my scholarship intact, and working 12 hours a week in the university library to cover my personal expenses. I did all of this simultaneously and without a great deal of external support because I had learned, by then, to be the infrastructure of my own life. My mother called every week. My father called less often, and the calls, when they came, were brief and frequently included an update on Derek's season before they included a question about mine. Derek had been drafted. This happened in the spring of my senior year, which was also the spring of Derek's junior year at Georgia Southern, where he had pitched well enough to draw attention from professional scouts. He was selected in the 19th round by the Savannah Bananas' affiliated organization. Not a glamorous pick, not the kind of draft position that puts a player on a direct path to the majors, but a real pick, a professional contract, a beginning. My parents were thrilled in a total and consuming way. My father drove to Statesboro for the signing. My mother called me to tell me the news, and she was genuinely excited, and also, I could hear in the spaces between sentences, slightly anxious about what I might be feeling, because my mother always heard the spaces. I was genuinely happy for Derek. I want to say this because it is true and because I think it matters that it is true. I was not resentful of his draft pick. I was not sitting somewhere calculating what his good news meant for my visibility in the family. I was happy for him, and I called him and told him so and meant it. Derek and I had never been close in the way of siblings who confide in each other. But we were not hostile and we were not competitive, and I genuinely wanted him to succeed at the thing he had worked for. The complication was not Derek. The complication was never Derek. Graduation was on a Saturday in May. Mercer's commencement ceremony for the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, which was my college, began at 10 in the morning and lasted approximately 2 hours. I was graduating with honors, cum laude, which required a GPA above 3.7 and which I had maintained across 4 years and across the research fellowship and across the thesis and across the 12 hours a week in the library. I was not valedictorian. I was not giving a speech. I was one of several hundred students walking across a stage to collect a diploma that represented 4 years of quiet, consistent, unglamorous work. I had told my parents the date in September of the previous year. I had told them again at Thanksgiving. I had confirmed it in March when they sent out the family graduation announcement cards that my mother had ordered from a stationery company in Atlanta. Derek's first professional game as a starting pitcher was on the same Saturday in May, Savannah, Georgia, which is about 260 miles from Macon and about 250 miles from the Mercer University auditorium where I would be walking across the stage. His coach had told him he would be starting 2 weeks before the game. Derek told my parents the same week he told his coach. My father made his decision sometime between that conversation and the following Sunday dinner, and I found out about his decision at that Sunday dinner, 6 days before my graduation. He told me at the table. My mother was in the kitchen getting the salad. He said, "Joe, I need to tell you something about graduation." He said, "Derek is starting in Savannah on Saturday and I am going to drive down for it." He said it the way he said most difficult things, which was quickly and without much preface, like a man who has decided something and wants to deliver the information before anyone can introduce a reason to reconsider. He said, "I know this is not great timing and I am sorry about that." He said, "There will be photos and your mother will be there." He said he was really proud of me. I sat with that sentence at the dinner table in my family home on Caldwell Drive for a moment. I was 22 years old. I was graduating cum laude from a 4-year university in 6 days. My father was going to miss it to watch my brother pitch the 4th inning of a minor league baseball game in a stadium where they were known for entertaining their fans by having the players do trick plays between innings. My mother came back with the salad. She looked at my father and then at me, and she knew, from the quality of the silence, what had been said. She sat down. She did not correct him. She did not say, "Raymond, you cannot miss your daughter's graduation for a baseball game." She sat down and she served the salad and she said, "Joanna, I am going to get so many pictures." And I understood in that moment that she had known this was coming and had not been able to stop it and was doing the thing she had always done, which was compensate in the ways available to her for the things she could not fix. I said, "Okay, Dad." I said it clearly and without drama, the way I said most things. I said, "I understand." He nodded. He looked relieved. We ate dinner. I drove home to my apartment after dinner and sat on my couch for a long time without turning on the lights. I was not crying. I was doing the specific arithmetic of the moment. Adding this Saturday in May to the Sunday dinners, and the Sunday phone calls, and the research fellowship conversation, and the 12 years of Derek's baseball travel, and the allocation and reallocation of the family's available attention, and producing a sum that I had been close to producing for a long time, but had kept adjusting before it arrived at a final number. On that Sunday evening in my dark apartment, it arrived. My father was not going to my graduation because my brother was pitching in Savannah. My father had calculated, without appearing to calculate at all, that Derek pitching in Savannah was more important than Joanna walking across the stage in Macon. He had reached this conclusion without apparent difficulty and had delivered it to me at the dinner table without apparent awareness of what the conclusion meant. Not just about that Saturday, about everything, about the 17 years of Saturday arithmetic that had preceded it. I graduated on a Saturday morning in May with my mother in the third row, which was where my father was supposed to be. She brought flowers. She took photographs. She cried when I walked across the stage, which was the right thing to do and which I will never stop being grateful for. After the ceremony, she took me to lunch at a restaurant I chose, and we ate and talked, and she asked me everything about graduate school applications and my thesis and what I was hoping for. And it was a good afternoon in every way that an afternoon can be good, while also being situated inside something painful. I did not say anything about my father at lunch. She knew everything I would have said, and I did not need to say it to her. He called me that evening. He said Derek had pitched 5 good innings. He said it was really something to see him out there. He said he was proud of me too, and he hoped graduation had been good. I said it was great, Dad. He said your mother took lots of pictures. I said yes, she did. He said we would celebrate properly next time I was home. I said sounds good. We hung up. I want to tell you about the years between that graduation Saturday and the retirement party Saturday, because those years are the context that makes the retirement party make sense. And I want you to understand not just what I did, but why I was still capable of being surprised by anything after 17 years of the same arithmetic. I went to graduate school at the University of Florida in Gainesville, which was where I had received the best offer. Full funding, a strong advisor, a research group working on exactly the problems I wanted to work on. I moved to Gainesville in August and built a life there the way I had always built things, from scratch and with my own hands and without a cosigner on anything. My mother visited twice in 5 years. My father came once for a departmental open house event that my advisor had encouraged all graduate students to invite their families to. And he walked around the labs and asked questions and seemed genuinely interested and told me at dinner that night that he was really proud of what I was building. It was a good visit. I held on to it. Derek's professional career lasted 4 years. He pitched in, the minors moved through several organizations, had a shoulder injury in his second year that required surgery, and a long rehabilitation, came back and pitched well for about 18 months. And then had a second injury that ended his playing career at 26. He transitioned into coaching, first at the minor league level, and then as a pitching coach at a high school in Augusta, where he was apparently very good and very valued. I was glad for him. I called him when I heard about the second injury, and talked for about 40 minutes, and meant every word of the sympathy I offered. Derek and I had reached a kind of adult friendship that was warmer and more honest than our childhood relationship had been, in the way that sometimes happens when siblings grow into adults who choose to be in each other's lives rather than simply being in each other's lives by default. What did not change, over those years, was the specific quality of my father's attention. It did not change because it had never been examined, and things that are not examined do not change. He called on birthdays and at Christmas and occasionally when something prompted him to think of me, and the calls were warm and genuine in a surface sense and shallow in every other sense. He asked about my work without listening to the answers with any depth. He updated me on Derek's life in the specific way of a person who finds one subject consistently more interesting than another and has never thought about why. He was not cruel, he was not cold. He was simply and consistently, and after 32 years of my life without a single honest conversation about it, more interested in Derek than in me. I finished my PhD. I took a postdoctoral position at Vanderbilt in Nashville. I published papers. I built a research program. At 30, I was offered a faculty position at a university in Atlanta, my first real job. The one that meant I had arrived at the place I had been building toward for 12 years of graduate education and training. I called my mother with the news and she cried the good way. I called my father and he said, "That is really great, Joe. That is a real achievement. And then he told me Derek had been offered the head coaching position at his high school and that he was really proud of him too. I did not say anything about the pairing of those two pieces of information in the same breath. I said that was great about Derek, I would call him. I got off the phone and sat with my coffee and thought about the arithmetic one more time and arrived at the same number I had been arriving at since I was 22 years old, sitting in the dark in my Macon apartment. The retirement party was planned for a Saturday in June, 11 months out. My father was retiring from 30 years with the agricultural equipment company, which was a real milestone and deserved to be celebrated. My mother had organized the event, a Saturday evening dinner at a hotel ballroom in Macon, 60 or 70 guests, speeches, a slideshow, the proper and formal recognition of 30 years of a man's working life. She called me in July to tell me about it, and I told her I would be there, and I meant it. Over the following 10 months, I had no reason to change my mind. I bought a plane ticket. I made a hotel reservation. I bought a dress. I planned to bring a gift. I told my colleagues I would be away that weekend. I organized my life around being present for my father's retirement party because that is what you do for your parents, and I intended to do it. 48 hours before the party, my father called me. He called on a Thursday evening. I was at my desk in my office at the university finishing a grant proposal. He said he needed to tell me something about the party. He said Derek had asked if he could say a few words at the dinner, which of course was fine, and he had asked Derek what he wanted to talk about. He said Derek had prepared a speech about what it meant to have a father who always showed up, who never missed a game, who drove to Savannah, and drove to Augusta, and drove to every tournament and every showcase, and never made Derek feel like his baseball was anything other than the most important thing in the world when Derek was on the mound. He said he wanted to warn me that the speech was going to be emotional, and he hoped that would be okay with me. I sat with the phone at my ear for a moment. I said, "Dad, can I ask you something?" He said, "Of course." I said, "Do you remember my graduation?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Of course I do." I said, "Do you remember where you were?" Another pause. He said, "I went to Derek's game." He said it quietly and not defensively, which surprised me. I said, "Yes." He said, "I know that wasn't right, Joe." I said, "I am not calling to relitigate it. I am calling because I want you to understand something before I tell you what I am going to tell you." He said, "Okay." I said, "I have spent 32 years being the child in this family who managed herself, who did not need anything, who did not ask for the games to be attended or the calls to be longer or the attention to be redistributed. I managed myself because I am good at it, and because I understood from a young age that the attention was already allocated. I have never said any of this to you because I did not know how to say it without it becoming something neither of us wanted it to become. I am saying it now because Derek is going to stand up in that ballroom on Saturday and give a speech about how you always showed up, and I am going to be sitting in that room. And I am trying to decide whether that is something I can sit through." My father was quiet for a long time, long enough that I checked the phone to make sure the call had not dropped. Then he said, "Joanna." He said it quietly, my full name, which he almost never used. He said, "I hear what you are saying." He said, "I have not been fair to you." He said it plainly, without qualification, which was not what I had expected. He said, "I have known that for a long time, and I have not done anything about it, and I am not going to insult you by making excuses tonight." He said, "I hope you will come on Saturday." He said he would talk to Derek about the speech. I said I would think about it and I would let him know. I sat in my office for 2 hours after we hung up. I thought about the arithmetic one more time. Not the graduation, Saturday arithmetic, not just that, all of it. The Sunday dinners and the fellowship conversation, and the phone calls and the 32 years of managed invisibility. And now two things sitting side by side in the same moment, my father saying I have not been fair to you and meaning it, and Derek preparing to stand up in a hotel ballroom and describe a father who always showed up, and me being asked to sit in that room and receive both of those things at the same time. I thought about what it would mean to go. I thought about the dress I had bought and the hotel reservation and the plane ticket. I thought about my mother, who had organized the party for 11 months and who deserved to have both her children in the room. I thought about Derek, who had not done anything wrong, who was simply a son giving a speech about a father who had genuinely always shown up for him because the father had genuinely always shown up for him. And the speech was true, and the truth was the problem. I thought about what it would feel like to sit in that room and listen to the truth being spoken and receive it as love, while knowing with the full clarity of 32 years of accumulated arithmetic exactly what the truth had cost. I thought about it for 2 hours. Then I went home. I took the dress out of the garment bag and hung it on the back of the door. I looked at it for a moment. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and wrote out the card. The card said, "Congratulations on 30 years of service. I hope the party is everything you imagined." I signed it with my name. I addressed the envelope. I went to bed. In the morning, I drove to the post office 3 miles from the hotel, where the party would be held that evening, and I mailed the card. Then I drove to a diner I had looked up the night before and ate breakfast alone and read a book. And I sat there for about an hour, and I was not crying, and I was not performing equanimity for anyone because there was no one to. I was just a woman in a diner in Macon, Georgia, eating eggs and reading a book on the morning of a party she had decided my mother called at 8:15 in the evening. I was in my pajamas. I had not checked out because I was 8 and because checking out required information on my desk that I didn't know what to do. I asked her, she said, "Jemima, where are you?" I said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I said I couldn't understand you." She was quiet for a moment. She was not angry. I could hear in her silence that she had understood something and that the understanding was did you talk to your father? I said, "Yes, tonight." She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you myself." She said, "She said it was so late that you knew exactly what to say." She said, "He is going to the hospital." I said, "I know. I'm going to make some calls."
ยังหักอยู่
Sunday. The call lasted an hour and 40 minutes, which was longer than any conversation we had ever had. He said he had talked to Derek about the speech, and Derek had said to him, and Derek had said to him, "I'm sorry," which was generous of Derek because I didn't know what to say in the exact conversation he was supposed to have. And he had understood something that he should have understood about me, which was that he was not and that showing up for one of them while not showing up for the other
บ่เคยคิดจะห่างลาให้แก้วตาล่องลอยแต่ใจก็ยังฝันคอยเลื่อนลอยห่างสุดฟ้าจะขอตามหากคนงามให้ได้เห็นหน้าสุดสนุลาด้วยหักขอเป็นเด่นใจเดียวกันมีชีวิตที่สิ้นบานคู่กันไปให้นานนานบ่มีวันหมดสิ้นความหมายส่วนดินฟ้าจะสลายก็ยังคอยฝันคู่กันไปให้นานนานบ่มีวันหมดสิ้นความหมายส่วนดินฟ้าจะสลายยังหักอยู่
We had dinner at a restaurant near my apartment and walked around the neighborhood afterward, and he asked about my research, and when I explained it, he asked follow-up questions, real ones. The kind that require actually hearing the answer to the first question before you can formulate the second. It was not everything, it was something. At Christmas, we were all home at the house on Caldwell Drive, me and Derek and my mother and my father and Derek's wife and their 2 kids. It was a full house in the way of family Christmases, loud, warm, slightly chaotic, doing something at the same time. My mother managing the kitchen with the efficiency of a person who has been managing family logistics for 30 years and is very good at it. At some point in the afternoon, when the kids were occupied and Derek and his wife had gone to pick up the last of the groceries, my father and I sat at the kitchen table
หวัง
together
หั
and
ก
drank
อยู่
coffee.
คู่กา
He said,
ย
"I have been
ส่อง
thinking
ใส
about what you
เหมื
said
อ
in
น
October
น้
about showing up." He
ำทุก
said,
เสาร์แรง
"I want
ใน
to be
ค
honest with
ำ
you
จะ
about
หักเดียวเลย
something."
ขอจ
He said he had not realized until I said it how completely he had failed to show up for me over the years.
ำบ่
Not
เค
because
ย
he
คิ
had
ด
not
จะ
cared,
ห่าง
but
ลา
because caring and showing up
ให้
are
แก้ว
different
ตา
things.
ล่อง
And he had
ลอ
confused me for a
ย
long time.
แต่ใจก็ยังฝันคอยเลื่อนลอยห่าง
I said, "I am too."
สุดฟ้าจะขอตามหากคนงามให้ได้เห็นหน้าสุดสนุลาด้วยหักขอเป็นเด่นใจเดียวกันมีชีวิตที่สิ้นบานคู่กันไปให้นานนานบ่มีวันหมดสิ้นความหมาย ลายก็ยังคอยฝันคู่กันไปให้นานนานบ่มีวันหมดสิ้นความหมายส่วนดินฟ้าจะสลายยังหาอยู่
conflicts with something else we have planned. I understand how that arithmetic works. I have been on the wrong side of that arithmetic my entire life. It's meant I am going to do the arithmetic requires, and I am going to do it quietly and without drama and without making I'm going to mail the card from 3 miles away because the card is what I have to offer tonight, and the card is promised. The graduation was not promised. The graduation required me to sit in the third and smile and tell my father afterwards that I understood and that this game was not over. The graduation required me to show question during the Q&A period, not a brilliant question. Just an honest one, the kind of question you ask when you are trying to understand rather than trying to He brought me flowers after me, which was the first time he had brought me flowers for anything, and I put them in a vase on my desk. Derek and I talked more than we ever had. He called me the week after the retirement party, and we talked for almost 2 hours, and he said things were honest and generous and that which is the only kind of person he has. I have not been good at this. I cannot say I have not been good at this specifically. He did not mean to. I said I was not being good. I said being at the beginning, the Sunday morning call. I told her I was sorry I had not been there. She said she understood. I said I knew she did. She said your father is going to want to talk to you, which was how she had always handled things, preparing the ground, making the approach possible, doing the invisible work of family maintenance that nobody gave her credit for. I told her I would answer when he called. She said, good. She said, I love you, Joanna. I said, I love you, Mom. I meant it the way I always mean things I say to her, which is completely and without reservation, because she has always been the person in my family who saw me and being seen by the right person. Even when the wrong person is not seeing you, is the thing that keeps you from disappearing entirely into the invisibility. There is a thing I have been thinking about a great deal in the 2 years since the retirement party, and and I want to try to say it clearly because I think it is the most important thing in this story. The invisible child, the one who manages herself, the one who does not make a fuss, the one who is fine, always fine, is doing something remarkable and something costly at the same time. The remarkable thing is the self-sufficiency, the capacity to build your own infrastructure, to become the architect of your own life without waiting for anyone to hand you the plans. That is real, and it is valuable, and it has produced things in me that I would not trade. The costly thing is the invisibility itself, which becomes over time a habit of making yourself small enough to fit in the space that has been assigned to you, even when the space is too small. Even when you have grown past it, even when the architecture of the house you grew up in was built to accommodate someone else's dimensions. The card broke the habit, not permanently, not completely, but it interrupted the pattern long enough to let something else begin. And the something else that began is imperfect and ongoing and does not look like resolution because resolution is not what life actually offers. What life offers is revision. You get to revise the story, not replace it. The graduation Saturday is still in the story. The Sunday dinner where my father said I am going to Savannah is still in the story. The 12 years of shorter than necessary phone calls are still in the story. They do not become something other than what they were. What the card added to the story was this, and then I told the truth quietly and without drama in the only way I could tell it in that moment, from a post office 3 miles from the party. And the truth told that way after 32 years of not being told did something that nothing before it had done. It was heard. My name is Joanna Briggs. I am a faculty member in the Department of Biology at a university in Atlanta, Georgia. I study cellular membrane dynamics, which is the work I have been building toward since I was a 7th grader, asking questions in a Macon science classroom that my teacher liked to answer. I am the daughter of Raymond and Ellen Briggs of Caldwell Drive in Macon, and the sister of Derek, who is a high school pitching coach in Augusta, and who called me last week just to check in, which is something he had never done before this year. I am the woman who mailed a card from 3 miles away while her father's retirement party was happening, and who went to a diner and ate eggs and read a book and was not performing anything for anyone. I am also the woman who, 2 years later, sat in the 3rd row of a university lecture hall and watched her father raise his hand during the Q&A period and ask an honest question about her work. The 3rd row, where he was supposed to be 17 years ago. He was there, and I let it mean something, not everything. Not a rewriting of the 17 years before it, just something. Which is, after all this time, enough. If you have made it this far, I want to ask you something. I want you to think about the arithmetic you have been doing your whole life. The quiet, daily accounting of who showed up and who did not. Who allocated their attention in your direction and who allocated it elsewhere. Who called when things were good as well as when things were difficult. I want you to think about whether you have ever named that arithmetic out loud to the person whose attention you have been keeping count of, or whether you have managed it quietly the way the easy child always manages things. And I want you to know that naming it is available to you, not as a weapon, as a fact. The fact can be stated plainly and without drama and without making anyone the villain, because the villain is usually not a person. It is a pattern, and patterns can be interrupted. Sometimes the interruption is a conversation. Sometimes it is a card mailed from 3 miles away. Sometimes it is whatever you have available in the moment. What matters is that the truth gets said. What matters is that you stop performing the generosity of the invisible child and start telling the person who has been not quite seeing you that you are there, that you have always been there, that you would like to be seen. I want to go back to something I have not yet described in enough detail because I think the detail matters and because I think leaving it out would be a kind of dishonesty. And I have spent enough of my life performing the dishonesty of omission. I want to go back to the years between the graduation Saturday and the retirement party Saturday and tell you what those years actually felt like from the inside, because those years are not a gap in the story. They are most of the story. They are the part where I built a life, and also simultaneously continued to carry the specific weight of being the child who had been allocated less, and where those two things coexisted without resolving. The way things coexist when they are not examined but are simply inhabited. Graduate school at the University of Florida was, in the most important ways, the best years of my life to that point. Not because they were easy. They were not easy. Graduate school in the sciences is not easy, and anyone who tells you otherwise is describing a different program than the one I was in. But because, for the first time in my life, I was in an environment where the thing I was good at was also the thing that was valued. I was a good scientist, not a spectacular one. Not the kind who makes a discovery in their second year that reshapes their field, but a careful and rigorous and genuinely curious one. The kind who reads the methodology sections of papers with the same attention most people give to the results sections. The kind who notices things that are not in the paper because they are paying close enough attention to see what the paper is not saying. My advisor, a woman named Dr. C. Carolyn Marsh, who had been doing cellular biology for 28 years, and who had a very low tolerance for careless thinking and a very high tolerance for genuine uncertainty, saw this in me within the first semester and encouraged it with the specific, unsparing investment of a mentor who knows what she is looking at and is not going to waste it. She was, in many ways, the first person in authority in my life who gave me the full portion of her attention without me having to earn it against a competitor. I am not saying this to contrast her with my father in a way that is unfair to him. I am saying it because I think it is true, and because I think it illuminates something about what the smaller portion years had done to my expectations. I had come by the time I arrived in Gainesville to expect that attention was always allocated in advance and that my portion was always going to be the smaller one, and that the right response to this was to manage myself excellently so that the smaller portion could be made sufficient. Dr. Terkopian. Marsh allocated her attention based on what she saw, not on what she had decided in advance, and what she saw in me was someone who deserved the full portion. The experience of receiving that was so unfamiliar that it took me almost a full semester to stop waiting for it to be reduced. I published my first paper at the end of my second year. A modest paper, a single finding from a well-designed experiment, not groundbreaking but solid and correct, which is what science requires first before it requires anything else. I called my mother to tell her. She said, "Joanna, that is really something, tell me about it." I told her about it for about 20 minutes, and she listened with the engaged, specific attention she always brought to my news and asked questions that were genuine rather than polite. And when we hung up, I felt the specific warmth of being told that something you have done matters to someone who matters to you. I called my father. He said, "That is great, Joe, a published paper, that is a real milestone." He said Derek had been named to the all-conference team that spring, which was great news. I said, "Yes, tell him congratulations." We hung up. I sat with the two calls, one after the other, and did the arithmetic. The arithmetic was always there. I had not invented it. It was not a story I was telling myself about injustice that was not real. It was a consistent and documentable pattern that had been operating for as long as I could remember, and the only variable that changed over the years was my ability to name it to myself with precision. At 22, I had named it in the dark apartment after the Sunday dinner where my father told me he was going to Savannah. At 25, in Gainesville, I was naming it with more precision, and the precision was what eventually made it possible to say out loud to someone other than myself. I did not say it out loud until I was 32, on the Thursday phone call 2 days before the retirement party. That is 10 years between the first clear naming and the first saying. 10 years is a long time. I want to be honest about why it took that long, because I think the honest answer is more useful than the simple one. The simple answer is that I was afraid. Not of my father specifically. I was not afraid of what he would say, or that he would be angry, or that the relationship would be damaged beyond repair. I was afraid of the naming itself. There is a particular kind of fear that belongs to the person who has always managed well, and it is the fear of discovering that the management was covering something that cannot, in fact, be managed. If I said it out loud, if I said, "You have consistently given your attention to Derek and not to me, and this has cost something real," then I would have to live in a world where that sentence existed and where the response to it, whatever the response was the information I had. If my father heard the sentence and dismissed it, or became defensive, or did not understand, then I would have to know that. The not saying had protected me from having to know. The management had been, in part, a management of what I was willing to find out. What shifted at 32, on the phone 2 days before the retirement party, was that I had run out of the patience the management required. Not dramatically, not in a breakdown. Just in the way that a container that has been filled incrementally over 32 years eventually reaches the point where there is no more room. And the thing that was being added most recently, Derek's speech about the father who always showed up, delivered in a hotel ballroom while I sat at a table trying to hold all of the arithmetic at once, was the thing that filled the last available space. I said it because I had run out of the room not to say it. The response, as I have described, was not what I feared. My father heard me. Not completely. Not with the full historical context I was carrying, but enough. He said, "I have not been fair to you." He said it without defense and without immediate qualification, and that, the absence of defense, the absence of the qualifying sentence that was surely available to him, the absence of "yes but," and the absence of "you have to understand," was what made it possible for me to go on. I went on for another 12 minutes, carefully and without drama, naming the specific things I had been managing for 32 years, and he listened. I am going to tell you something about that conversation that I have not told most people. About 3 minutes in, when I was in the middle of describing the research fellowship conversation at Sunday dinner, my voice did something I had not planned for it to do. It cracked. Not into crying exactly. I am not someone who cries easily or who uses crying to make a point, but into the specific vocal texture of someone who is describing something that has cost them more than they have previously admitted. And the cost of it is becoming audible for the first time. My father heard it. He said, "Joe," and then he stopped. He did not say anything for a moment. And in that moment I understood that he was sitting with something too, that the hearing of my voice do that thing was producing something in him that the words alone had not yet produced. He said, "I hear you." He said it quietly. And then he waited for me to go on. I went on. I described the graduation. I described the Sunday dinners. I described the phone calls and the specific quality of the attention they contained and what it had felt like over 32 years. To receive that quality of attention from a parent who was capable of a different quality and simply directed it elsewhere. I did not say these things to wound him. I said them because they were true and because the truth, said plainly, is the only thing that creates the possibility of something different. Accusation would have closed the conversation. Truth, offered without accusation, kept it open. I had learned this from watching my mother manage my father for 32 years with exactly that combination: truth without accusation, care without enabling, patience without passivity. She was, in this, as in most things, the one who showed me how it was done. After the phone call, I went for a walk. I live in a neighborhood in Atlanta where the streets are wide and tree-lined, and in June the air in the evening is warm but not yet oppressive, and I walked for about 45 minutes without a destination. Through streets I had been walking since I moved to this neighborhood 3 years earlier. I was not processing anything specific. I was just walking, letting my body do something while my mind settled from the effort of the conversation. When I got back to my apartment, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the garment bag hanging on the closet door with the dress inside it, and I thought about what I was going to do. I want to tell you the full version of that decision-making, because the shortened version, "I decided not to go, I wrote the card, I mailed it," does not capture what the decision actually was. The decision was not to punish my father. The decision was not to make a statement or to demonstrate something or to set a precedent or to send a message. The decision in the most honest version of it was this: I had just had the most honest conversation I had ever had with my father. And I had said things that were true, and that had cost me something to say, and he had heard them in a way that also cost him something, and what I needed now, what the conversation needed, what we both needed, was for the truths I had just said to exist in the world for a little while before it was required to sit inside the performance of a party. The party was not the right container for the truth. The party was 60 or 70 people and a slideshow, and Derek's speech about the father who always showed up, and that speech even revised, even softened, was going to be a celebration of the exact thing we had just been honest about. And I needed the honesty to have some space to breathe before it was required to coexist with the celebration. The card was that space. The card said, "I see this moment. I am acknowledging it. I am not going to stand in the ballroom and prevent it from being what it is, because it is your retirement and it is real and it should be celebrated. But I am also not going to perform the presence that would make it look like everything is fine, because everything is not fine. It is honest, which is different from fine. And honest is what we have right now. And I want to honor that by being honest about where I am tonight. I mailed it from 3 miles away because the distance felt right. Not far enough to be dramatic. Close enough to be a fact. I was in Macon. I was near the hotel. I was choosing not to be in the room. That was the complete and unambiguous truth of the situation, and I saw no reason to dress it up as something else. The eggs and the book in the diner were the rest of the truth. I sat in a booth by the window and ordered eggs over easy with whole wheat toast and a cup of coffee, and I read the book I had brought in my bag, which was a novel I had been working through slowly for several weeks, and I sat there for about an hour, in the warm June morning of Macon, Georgia, and I was with some precision exactly all right. Not happy exactly, not sad exactly, not triumphant or vindicated or relieved or any of the things that people sometimes project onto this kind of moment. Just all right. Present. Sitting with the truth of where I was and what I had decided and why, without needing it to be more than it was. I think that might be the most honest description of what the card actually did for me. Not the card as a message to my father, though it was that. The card as a thing I did for myself. The act of writing it and addressing it and mailing it from the post office 3 miles away while the party was happening without me, that act said to me, from me, you are allowed to respond to the arithmetic honestly. You are allowed to let the arithmetic produce a result that is legible, that can be read by the people on the other side of it. You are allowed to stop performing the generosity of the easy child long enough to say, this is what the arithmetic looks like from where I stand. You are allowed to mail the card. I have thought many times about my mother at that party. She was there, of course, she had organized it, she was the reason it was happening. She was wearing the dress she had bought for the occasion, and she was managing 60 or 70 guests and the slideshow and the catering and the specific logistics of an event she had spent 11 months planning. And somewhere in the middle of managing all of that, she received the knowledge that I was not there. She had called at 8:15, which was about an hour into the party. She had heard my voice and understood something immediately and completely because she always understood things immediately and completely, and she had said what she said and hung up. And then she had gone back to the party and managed the rest of it with the same grace and competence she brought to every obligation she had ever taken on. I thought about calling her during the party to apologize more fully, and I decided not to because more fully was not what the moment needed. I had apologized, she had understood. The fuller conversation would happen in its own time, which it did, on the Sunday morning call when we talked for 40 minutes and said the things that needed to be said. And she told me she had known the conversation with my father was coming and that she was glad it had happened. And I told her I was glad too, and she said, Joanna, I love you. And I said, I love you, Mom. And I meant it with the specific weight of a person telling someone they love them who has spent 32 years showing up in the ways that the other person in the equation was not showing up. I am going to tell you one more thing about the retirement party, and then I am going to tell you about what the 2 years since have looked like. Because the 2 years since are where the story actually matters for anyone listening to this who is in the middle of their own version of the arithmetic. What I found out later from Derek, who told me on the phone call the week after the party, was that my father had given a speech at the dinner. A speech he had not planned to give that he had decided to give sometime during the evening, when apparently the awareness of the empty chair, my empty chair, at the table that my mother had set with a place setting for me even after she knew I was not coming, because that is the kind of person my mother is, became something he could not sit inside without saying something. He stood up partway through the evening, after Derek's speech and after the slideshow, and he thanked everyone for being there. He talked about 30 years of work and what it had meant and what he was grateful for. And then, Derek told me, he said, I have 2 children and both of them have built things I am proud of. My son, Derek, is a baseball coach who has given more young men a love for the game than I can count. And my daughter, Joanna, is a scientist in Atlanta who is building a research program that I am only beginning to understand, but that I know is important. He said he was proud of both of them. He said he wished Joanna could be there tonight, but he understood why she was not, and he wanted her to know that he understood and that he hoped to do better. Derek told me this on the phone a week after the party. He said, Joe, Dad cried when he said your name. I sat with that for a moment. Derek said, I have never seen him cry before. I said, I know. Derek said, I think the card did something. I said, I hope so. He said, it did. I said, okay. He said, I'm sorry, Joe. I said, I know, Derek, I know you are. What the card did, in the end, was make my absence legible in a way that my presence had never been. For 32 years, I had been present. At dinners and at family gatherings and at holidays and at the one phone call a week. And my presence had been taken for granted because that is what happens to the child who is always there. Always fine. Always managing. My absence, made visible and explained in 6 words on a cream-colored card, was readable in a way my presence had never been. The card said, I was going to be there. I chose not to be. The choice has a reason. The reason is the arithmetic. You have the arithmetic in your hands now. Do what you want with it. He did something with it. He stood up at his own retirement party and said her name with tears in his eyes. It was too late to be the right moment. It was also a moment, and moments matter, and I have decided to let that one matter without requiring it to be more than it is. That is the thing I have learned in the 2 years since the card. Not to require moments to be more than they are. Not to require my father's effort to erase the arithmetic of the years before it, or to expect the new phone calls and the longer conversations and the visit to Atlanta and the third row of the lecture hall to constitute a resolution of something that is not in its nature resolvable. The graduation Saturday is still in the story. It is not going anywhere. The Sunday dinner where he said, "I am going to Savannah," is still in the story. All of the smaller portion years are still in the story. They do not become something other than what they were. What the card added to the story was a new chapter, and what the new chapter is about is honesty, and its consequences, and the consequences 2 years in are this: my father is trying, and my brother is trying. And my mother is still doing what she has always done, which is loving me with the full portion of her available attention. And the family I have is imperfect and real, and is making an effort that it was not making before, and that effort, imperfect and ongoing, and not guaranteed to produce any particular outcome, is the only thing that was ever actually available. My name is Joanna Briggs. I am a faculty member in the Department of Biology at a university in Atlanta, Georgia. I am the daughter of Raymond and Ellen Briggs. I am the sister of Derek. I am the woman who wrote a card in a parking lot and mailed it from 3 miles away and sat in a diner and ate eggs and read a book and was exactly all right. I am the woman who, 2 years later, is still doing the arithmetic and who is learning, slowly and imperfectly, to let the arithmetic include the new entries alongside the old ones, to let the third row of the lecture hall be in the ledger next to the empty seat at the graduation auditorium, to let the 2-hour phone call on Sunday morning be in the ledger next to the Sunday dinners where Derek's game was mentioned before my fellowship, to keep the books honestly, which means including everything, the costs and the credits both, and arriving at a number that is not resolved but is true. If you have made it this far, I want to say one more thing. To the person listening who is the easy child, the one who manages, the one who has been doing the arithmetic alone for years, your arithmetic is real. The smaller portion is real. The consistent allocation of the family's attention in a direction that is not yours is real, and it has cost you something real, and you do not owe anyone the performance of the generosity of not naming it. The naming is available to you. The card is available to you. The honest conversation is available to you whenever you are ready to have it, in whatever form is available to you in the moment you are in. The cost of naming it is real, and I will not pretend it is not. The cost of not naming it is also real, and it accumulates over years until you are sitting in a parking lot writing a card in your best handwriting and mailing it from 3 miles away because the truth finally has to go somewhere. Let it go somewhere. Let it be heard. Let the person who has not been seeing you find out that you are there, and that you have always been there, and that you are done being invisible in the space that was assigned to you. The space is too small. You have grown past it. Say so. That is everything I have. That is my story. Drop a comment below. Tell me your city and your local time. Tell me if you have ever done the arithmetic alone and what you decided to do about it or what you are still deciding. I read every single one. If you want more stories like this, I have left some in the description. Thank you for being here with me tonight. I will see you in the next one. There is something I have not yet talked about that I think deserves its own space in this story because it is the part of the story that I most often leave out when I tell it. And I leave it out because it is the most uncomfortable part. Not for my father, not for Derek, but for me. It is the part about what I did with the arithmetic in the years when I was not yet saying it out loud. What I did with it in the years when I was building my career and managing my life and calling home on schedule and performing the equanimity of the easy child. Because I did not do nothing with it. I did something with it. I just did it in directions that were not toward my father. I worked. I worked with the specific and driving energy of a person who has decided that if she is not going to receive the full portion of available attention from the people whose attention she most wants, She is going to produce something that makes that attention beside the point. She is going to build something so undeniable that the question of whether anyone is paying attention to it becomes secondary to the fact of its existence. This is not a healthy motivation, or not purely healthy. It is the motivation of a person who has converted a wound into a fuel source, which is efficient and also costly in ways that take a long time to become visible. I published 7 papers in 5 years of graduate school. My advisor said this was exceptional. My committee said it was exceptional. The papers were good, careful and rigorous and original in the modest way of good scientific work. And they were published in journals that were respected in my field, and they produced the kind of professional trajectory that opened the doors I needed opened. I am genuinely proud of them. I am also looking back with the honesty that 2 years of talking to my father and my therapist have made possible. Aware that some of the energy that went into them was the specific and relentless energy of a person who needs to prove something, not to anyone in particular, to the arithmetic, to the part of her that had spent 2 decades in the smaller portion and had decided that the smaller portion was not going to be the final verdict. There is a version of this that is pure and admirable. The woman who turns disadvantage into drive, who converts invisibility into fuel, who builds something real out of the raw material of not being seen. That version is true. I did turn the arithmetic into fuel. The fuel produced something real. But the full version also includes the cost of running on that fuel, which is a specific kind of exhaustion that does not show on the outside and that you only notice when you stop long enough to notice it. I stopped long enough to notice it in the weeks after the retirement party when the biggest thing I had been managing, the arithmetic itself with my father out loud, had finally been said. And the saying of it had not produced a catastrophe, and I found myself sitting in my apartment in Atlanta on a Tuesday evening with no particular deadline to meet and no particular performance to maintain. And I was tired in a way that was not about the week. I called my therapist the following Thursday. I had been seeing her periodically for about 18 months, mostly around work-related anxiety. The specific anxiety of a person in a competitive field who has never fully trusted that the thing she has built is solid enough to withstand scrutiny. I told her about the phone call with my father and the card and the diner and the eggs. She listened with the complete attention that I paid her to provide, which I say without cynicism because the payment does not make the attention less real. She said, "What are you feeling right now?" which is the thing therapists say, and which I have learned to answer honestly rather than efficiently. I said, "I feel like I have been running at a particular speed for a very long time, and I have just slowed down enough to notice that the speed was not sustainable, and I am not sure what the right speed is." She said, "That sounds accurate." She said, "What do you think you were running from?" I said, "Not from. Toward." She said, "What were you running toward?" I said, "The version of my life where the arithmetic came out even." She said, "And?" I said, "I think I understood on Thursday that the arithmetic is never going to come out even. My father is going to call more, and the conversations are going to be longer, and he is going to try, and the graduation Saturday is still going to be in the ledger." She said, "Can both of those things be true?" I said, "Yes." She said, "How does that feel?" I said, "Like the right size. Not resolved, the right size." The right size is the thing I have been living in for the past 2 years. Not resolution. I have said this before and I want to say it again because I think it is the most important thing, but the right size. The arithmetic is the right size now. It fits in a space that I can see the edges of, rather than spilling into every conversation and every professional achievement and every phone call home. I know what it cost. I know what it produced. I know what the new chapter is and what it is not. That is the right size. I want to tell you about something that happened in March of this year, because it is the moment that has stayed with me most clearly, and that I think is the most honest answer to the question of what the arithmetic looks like now. My university hosted its annual research symposium, a 2-day event at which faculty present their current work to an audience of colleagues, students, administrators, and invited guests from other institutions. I had been invited to give one of the featured talks this year. The first time I had been asked to give a featured talk, which was a professional milestone that I would have in any previous year. Called my mother about immediately and my father about eventually. This year I called both of them at the same time. I called my mother's cell phone and told her to put me on speaker and go find my father. And she did. And I heard her footsteps through the house on Caldwell Drive and my father's voice saying, "What is it?" and my mother saying, "Joanna has something to tell us," and then both of them were on the phone together. I told them about the featured talk. My mother said, "Joanna, that is incredible, tell us everything." And then she did the thing she always did, which was ask the right questions. My father said, "Joe, that is a real achievement." And then, and this is the part that stays with me. He said, "Can we come?" He said, "Can we come?" Not I will try to make it. Not I hope to be there. Can we come? As if the default answer was yes and he was asking for confirmation. I said yes. I said the date. I said the hotel nearby would have rooms. He said, "Your mother will make the reservation tonight." He said, "We will be there." He said it the way you say something when you mean it and also when you understand, in a way you have not previously understood, what it means to say it. They came, both of them. They drove from Macon to Atlanta on a Friday morning, which is a 90-minute drive in good traffic and rather longer in the Friday morning traffic on I-116 and I-75. And they arrived at the university with 20 minutes to spare before the talk began. My mother was wearing the blue dress she wore to important occasions. My father was wearing the jacket he wore to things he wanted to be dressed appropriately for. They sat in the third row, which is where my mother had sat at my graduation, and they were there for the whole thing. I am a competent public speaker. I have been doing research presentations for 10 years, and I know how to stand at a podium and deliver material clearly and with appropriate emphasis. I am not someone who loses my composure at a podium. I am the easy child, the one who manages, the one who does not make a fuss. So when I stepped up to the podium and looked out at the audience and found my parents in the third row, and felt my voice do something in the first sentence, a slight, brief, almost imperceptible thing. The same thing it had done on the phone with my father in October. I brought it back immediately and continued. I do not think anyone in the audience noticed except my mother, who noticed everything, and my father, who was paying the kind of attention that notices. After the talk, there was a reception. My parents stood slightly apart from the academic conversations the way civilians stand at events that belong to a professional world they are observing from the outside. And I moved through the room and collected the congratulations and answered the questions and eventually made my way to where my parents were standing by the window. My mother hugged me with the hug she reserved for significant occasions. My father put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Joanna, I understood about half of what you said up there." I said, "That is a good percentage for a non-biologist." He said, "I want to understand the other half." I said, "I'll explain it over dinner." He said, "Good. I want to understand it." We went to dinner, the three of us, at a restaurant near my apartment. My father asked questions for about 40 minutes. Not brilliant questions. He was working with the information of a man who last studied biology in high school in 1974, but honest questions. The kind you ask when you genuinely want to understand and are not afraid of revealing that you do not yet understand. I answered each one as clearly as I could. By the end of the dinner, he had a rough map of what my research was and why it mattered, and he said so, and the saying so was not performed. He was not complimenting me to be kind. He was reporting what he had arrived at through 40 minutes of questions and answers. And what he had arrived at was the conclusion that the work was real, and that he could see why it mattered, and that he was proud of it. He said, "I am proud of it." He said it directly without the qualifier. "I am proud of you," which is easy to say and easy to receive, and said instead, "I am proud of it," which required him to have actually engaged with the thing itself, and he had. My mother watched all of this the way she always watched things, with complete attention and no commentary. When we got up to leave, she touched my arm and said quietly, "I am so glad we came." I said, "I am so glad you came too." She said, "I have always been so glad to come." I said, "I know, Mom, I know." We said goodnight in the parking lot. My father hugged me, which was not something he did often and which felt, in the specific way of things that are being done for the first time by someone who is trying, slightly unfamiliar and entirely genuine. He said, "We will be back." I said, "Good." He said, "I want to understand the other half." I said, "I'll have more to tell you by the time you come back." He said, "I'll be ready to hear it." They drove back to Macon on Saturday morning. I stood in my apartment after they left and looked out the window at the street for a few minutes. I was not crying. I was doing the arithmetic one more time. And the arithmetic included everything. The graduation Saturday and the Sunday, Dinners and the phone calls and the fellowship conversation and the card in the parking lot and the diner and the eggs and the October phone call and the retirement party speech and the third row of the lecture hall and the 40 minutes of questions over dinner and the hug in the parking lot. All of it. The full ledger. I added it up and the number I arrived at was not even. It was never going to be even. But it was a number I could see, and see clearly, and stand inside without it filling every room of my life. It was the right size. The card is still on the refrigerator in the house on Caldwell Drive. My mother told me this when I was home for Thanksgiving. She said she had found it in my father's desk drawer sometime in August and asked him about it, and he said he wanted to keep it. She had suggested and he had agreed that it belonged on the refrigerator, where the family's important things were kept. The photographs and the children's drawings that were decades old, and the Christmas card from the cousin in Portland that had been up since 2019. The card I had written in a parking lot in Macon on a June Saturday 2 years ago in my best handwriting with 6 words that were the honest distillation of 32 years of accumulated arithmetic, was on the refrigerator next to a photograph of Derek's wedding and a drawing I had made of a horse when I was 6 years old. I stood in front of the refrigerator at Thanksgiving and looked at it for a moment. Congratulations on 30 years of service, Dad. I hope the party is everything you imagined. My handwriting. The cream envelope, opened now and refolded around the card. On the refrigerator. My father came into the kitchen while I was standing there. He saw me looking at it. He said, "Your mother put it up." I said, "I know," she told me. He said, "I wanted to keep it." I said, "I know." He said, "It said the right thing." I said, "It said what I had." He said, "Yes." He said, "That was enough." That was enough. My name is Joanna Briggs. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I study cellular biology. I am the daughter of Raymond and Ellen Briggs. I am the sister of Derek. I am the woman who mailed a card from a post office 3 miles from a hotel ballroom and sat in a diner and read a book and was exactly all right. I am the woman whose card is on the refrigerator in her parents' kitchen in Macon, Georgia, next to a horse she drew when she was 6 years old. I am the woman who stood at a podium in March and felt her voice do something in the first sentence when she found her parents in the third row, and who brought it back, and who kept going. I am the woman who is still doing the arithmetic, and who has learned, finally, to let the new entries go in the ledger alongside the old ones without requiring them to cancel each other out. The ledger stays open. That is what ledgers do. You keep making entries, you keep arriving at numbers, you let the numbers be what they are. That is my story. Drop a comment below. Tell me your city and your local time. Tell me if you have ever been the easy child, the one who managed, the one who was always fine, the one who did the arithmetic alone. Tell me what you did about it, or what you are still in the middle of deciding. Tell me about the card you sent or the one you are still writing. I read every single one. If you want more stories like this, I have left some in the description. Thank you for being here with me tonight. I will see you in the next one. I want to add something that I have been circling around throughout this entire story and that I have not said directly. Because saying it directly requires a kind of honesty about myself that is harder than honesty about my father or my family or the arithmetic. It is this. I am not entirely sure that the card was the right thing to do. I have said in various ways and with various degrees of conviction that the card was honest, and that honesty is what the moment required, and that the consequences of the card were, on the whole, better than the consequences of going to the party would have been. I believe all of that. I also believe, and this is the part I have been circling, that the card was also, in some proportion that I cannot precisely calculate, a way of making my father feel what I felt. Not revenge. Something quieter and more complicated than revenge. The desire to create, for one evening, a version of the absence I had been carrying for 32 years. The desire to be missing in a way that was visible, that required someone to notice, that could not be absorbed into the general management of things the way my presence had always been absorbed. The desire to be the thing that was not there, for once, rather than the thing that was always there and taken for granted. If that is true, and I think it is at least partially true, then the card was not purely an act of honesty. It was also an act of something else. Something that is not quite revenge but that occupies a similar neighborhood. Something that wanted, after 32 years of absorbing the arithmetic, to make the arithmetic produce a result that someone else had to absorb for a change. I am not sure whether that makes the card right or wrong. I am not sure those are the right categories. What I know is that the card did what it did, and what it did included producing consequences that I believe were good, and that the party attended would not have produced. I also know that I made the decision from a complicated place, a place that included honesty and exhaustion, and the specific 32-year accumulation that had filled the last available space, and also beneath all of that, the quiet desire to be the one who was missing for once, to be the empty chair, to be the thing that someone looked at and felt the absence of, rather than the thing that was always present and never quite seen. I have talked about this with my therapist at some length. She said something that I have returned to many times since. She said, "The desire to be seen is not the same as the desire to cause pain. The desire to make your absence felt is not the same as the desire to punish. The desire to produce an accounting that is legible is not the same as revenge, even when it involves creating the conditions under which someone experiences a loss." She said, "You wanted to be visible. You had spent 32 years being invisible to your father in the specific way of the easy child, and you wanted, for one evening, to be visible. The card made you visible. The empty chair made you visible. The fact that the visibility produced discomfort for your father is not the same as saying you intended to cause discomfort. Discomfort is what happens when something that has been invisible for a long time becomes visible. It is the natural consequence of the truth, not the goal." I think she is right. I also think that the distinction she is drawing is one that is easier to maintain in the abstract than in the specific, and that in the specific, in the parking lot writing the card, mailing it from 3 miles away, the desire to be visible and the desire to make my father feel something were not entirely separable. They were braided together in the way that genuine motivations are often braided. Not one thing at a time, but several things simultaneously, some of them more admirable than others, all of them real. I am telling you this because I think the honest version of this story requires it, and because I think people who are in the middle of their own versions of the arithmetic deserve the honest version. If you are the easy child, the one who manages the one who has been doing the arithmetic alone, and you are thinking about your own version of the card, your own honest act, your own visible absence, your own moment of letting the truth be legible in a way it has not been before, I want you to know that the motivation is probably also complicated, it is probably also braided. It probably includes the genuine desire to say something true, and also somewhere in the braid, the desire to be felt, to be missed, to be the thing that is noticed in its absence rather than taken for granted in its presence. And I want you to know that that braid, complicated, partially uncomfortable, not entirely pure, is the braid that actual human motivations are made of. And that the impurity of the motivation does not invalidate the truth of the act. The card was honest. The card was also something else. Both of those things can be true. Both of those things were true for me. What I have arrived at 2 years later is something like this. I do not need the card to have been purely and entirely the right thing in order to be glad I sent it. I do not need my motivations to have been perfectly pure in order to believe that the honesty in them was real. I do not need the outcome to have been perfectly good in order to believe that it was better than the alternative. The card was impure and complicated and honest all at once, and it did what it did, and I am glad it did it, and that is enough. There is one more person in this story I have not given enough space to, and I want to give her the space she deserves before I finish. That person is my mother. Ellen Briggs of Caldwell Drive in Macon, Georgia. School librarian, 4th grade, Bibb County Elementary System, 31 years. The woman who showed me the children's section of the public library when I was 7 and told me I could take home any 6 books I wanted. The woman who sat in the 3rd row of the Mercer University auditorium with flowers and a camera and cried when I walked across the stage. The woman who called at 8:15 on the evening of the retirement party and said, "Where are you?" and then said, "I understand," in the full and complete way. She always said things she understood fully and completely. The woman who put the card on the refrigerator. I have talked in this story about the arithmetic, the consistent, accumulated pattern of my father's attention being allocated in Derek's direction rather than mine. What I have not talked about is the counter-arithmetic that my mother ran simultaneously for 32 years, which is the accounting of what you do when you love someone and the person who is supposed to share the responsibility of loving them is failing at it, and you cannot make them not fail. And so you do what you can within the constraints of what is available to you. What my mother did was show up. Every time and in every way that was within her power. She was in the third row at the graduation because my father was in the bleachers in Savannah, and she made the decision to be in the third row, not as a substitution for the thing that was missing, but as the thing she was going to give regardless. She asked the questions after the fellowship conversation because my father had moved on to Derek's tournament, and she asked them not because she was compensating, but because she wanted to know. She called every week on schedule because that is what she did. Because she understood that the call was the thing that held the thread in place, and she was not going to allow the thread to fail on her end because someone else's end had gone slack. She is the reason the arithmetic has a credit side. She is the reason the smaller portion, while genuinely smaller, was not nothing. She is the reason I can look back at 32 years and find alongside all of the places where I was not seen, the places where I was seen completely, where the full portion was given without reservation, where I was the person someone was paying the most attention to. She gave me that. She gave it consistently and without making a production of it, and without making my father wrong for the contrast, because she is not the kind of person who weaponizes love, who uses her attentiveness to underscore someone else's inattentiveness. She just loved me, quietly and fully and without making a story of it, for 32 years. And that love is what kept the arithmetic from producing a number I could not live inside. I told her this on the phone on a Sunday in September, about 3 months after the retirement party. I said, "Mom, I want to tell you something." She said, "Okay." I said, "I know I have thanked you before for being there, for the graduation, and for everything." She said, "You don't need to thank me." I said, "I know I don't need to. I want to." She said, "Okay." I said, "I want you to know that I know what it cost. I know that showing up every time while watching someone else not show up over 32 years costs something. I know it was not free, and I know you did not want me to feel the cost, and I know that not wanting me to feel it was another thing that cost you. I know all of that. And I want you to know that I know it, and that I am grateful for it in the full way, not just the polite way." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have been generous to me your whole life, Joanna." I said, "Not generous. Accurate." She said, "Sometimes accurate is the most generous thing." She said, "I love you." I said, "I love you, Mom." And I meant it in the way that I always mean things I say to her, which is completely and without any reservation and without any arithmetic at all, because with her there is no arithmetic. There is only the full portion which she has been giving since I was 7 years old in the children's section of the library. Every book she knew I would love already in her hand before I thought to ask. That is the complete story. The card on the refrigerator, the eggs in the diner, the third row of the lecture hall, the 40 minutes of questions over dinner, my mother in the third row at the graduation with flowers and a camera, my mother on the phone on Sunday in September saying, "I love you." The arithmetic, the full ledger, all of the entries, the costs, and the credits both. The impure and complicated and honest braid of what the card was and why I sent it and what it did. The right size. My name is Joanna Briggs. This is my story. Thank you for being in it with me. I will see you in the next one. I realize I have not told you enough about what my years in graduate school, and then as a postdoc, and then as a faculty member actually looked like from the inside, not the professional trajectory, which I have described, but the texture of the days, the specific quality of living as a person who has converted a wound into a fuel source, and is running on that fuel, and does not yet know that the fuel has a cost. Let me describe a Tuesday in my second year of graduate school. I am at my bench at 7:30 in the morning. The building is mostly empty. There is a postdoc named Marcus who is also always early, who I exchange a nod with when we pass in the hallway, and that is usually the only human interaction before 10 o'clock. I am running an experiment that requires careful attention over several hours, samples at specific intervals, measurements that need to be precise. A protocol I have run 12 times, and that I know well enough to run partly on autopilot, while some other part of my mind is occupied. What the other part of my mind is occupied with on this particular Tuesday is a Sunday phone call from 3 days earlier in which my father told me that Derek had been promoted from single A to double A, which was a genuinely exciting development in Derek's career, and in which my father asked me briefly how my research was going, and I said fine, and he said good, and we moved on. I am at the bench with the samples and the measurements, and the protocol I know well, and the other part of my mind is running the arithmetic again, adding this Sunday call to all the Sunday calls before it, arriving at the same number, and then I do what I always do with the number, which is redirect the energy of the arithmetic into the experiment in front of me. I run the samples with slightly more precision than the protocol requires. I take an extra measurement that is not strictly necessary but might be useful. I write more detailed notes than anyone is asking for. I am converting the arithmetic into work, and the work is good, and the good work is going to become a paper, and the paper is real. And the real paper is what I have instead of the full phone call that did not happen. This is not a complaint. I want to be clear about that. The papers are real. The career is real. The work I have done is genuinely valuable, and I would not trade it. What I am describing is the cost that runs alongside the value, the specific and durable exhaustion of running on converted grief. The way that energy source is efficient and also limiting in ways you do not notice until you stop running and sit in the quiet and feel the particular fatigue of a machine that has been running too hard for too long on a fuel that is not sustainable. I stopped running in the weeks after the retirement party. Not dramatically. I did not stop going to work or stop seeing colleagues or stop producing the outputs that my position required. But I stopped the relentless, driving, converted grief pace that had characterized my working life since graduate school, and in the stopping I felt the fatigue I had not been feeling while I was moving. I felt it in my body first, as a physical tiredness that sleep did not fully address. Then, I felt it in my mind, as a difficulty concentrating that was unfamiliar and slightly frightening. Then, I felt it in the place I usually kept the arithmetic, which is where the arithmetic lives, in a person who has been managing it for a long time. That place felt different. Lighter. Like a container that had been at capacity for years and had just had some of its contents addressed. The lightness was unfamiliar. I did not know, immediately, what to do with it. I had been organized around the weight for so long that the absence of some of the weight felt like a structural problem rather than a relief. I talked about this with my therapist, who said, "You are experiencing what happens when you stop compensating for something that you have been compensating for a very long time." She said, "The compensation was doing several things at once. It was protecting you from feeling the full weight of the thing you were compensating for. It was producing valuable outputs. And it was preventing you from knowing who you are when you are not compensating." She said, "Now you get to find out." I said, "That sounds frightening." She said, "A little. Also interesting." It has been, as she predicted, both. I am finding out who Joanna Briggs is when she is not running on converted grief. And the finding out is ongoing and imperfect, and occasionally disorienting and fundamentally interesting in the way of things that are actually new, rather than things that are simply unfamiliar. I am learning that I like silence in my apartment in a way I had not previously known I liked it, because the silence had always been filled with the quiet hum of the arithmetic. I am learning that I enjoy my work differently when it is not also serving as the counter-argument to an internal voice that is asking whether the work is good enough to make up for the attention that was never given. The work is the work. It does not need to make up for anything. It is good because it is careful and rigorous and original in the modest way of good scientific work, and that is what it needs to be, and that is enough. I am also learning, slowly, what it feels like to want things directly rather than to produce things as arguments against the arithmetic. I want my father to call. I want the calls to be the kind I have been getting since October 2 years ago. Longer, more specific, more genuinely interested in what I am doing and why. I want that because I want it, not because it would adjust the ledger balance. The ledger stays open, but I am less interested in the running total than I used to be. What I am interested in is the current entry, the call we had this morning, the visit planned for next month. The question he asked about my research on the phone last week. That was a better question than the question he asked the week before, which is evidence of a learning curve, which is evidence of effort, which is evidence of something real. The evidence of something real is what I have been looking for my entire life. Not a resolved ledger, not a balanced account. Just the evidence that the thing in front of me is real and is being offered genuinely and is worth receiving. I have that evidence now, imperfect and ongoing, and I am receiving it in the way you receive something that is being offered for the first time after a long wait. Carefully, gratefully. Without rushing it toward a conclusion it has not yet reached. I want to say, before I finish, that the card on the refrigerator is the thing I think about most when I think about this story. Not the graduation Saturday. Not the October phone call. Not the retirement party itself. The card. Congratulations on 30 years of service, Dad. I hope the party is everything you imagined. 6 words in the greeting, and 6 words in the hope. Written in my best handwriting in a parking lot in Macon on a Saturday morning in June while the party was happening without me. Mailed from 3 miles away. On the refrigerator in my parents' kitchen in Macon, Georgia, next to a horse I drew when I was 6 years old. My father put it there. He found it in the mailbox on the Monday after the party, after the speeches and the slideshow, and his own unplanned speech about his daughter who was not there. He read it, and he put it in his desk drawer, which is where he kept things he was not sure what to do with yet. And then in August, my mother found it, and they had a conversation, and they agreed that it belonged somewhere visible, and they put it on the refrigerator. I did not know any of this until Thanksgiving. I stood in the kitchen looking at it for a moment, and my father came in, and we had the exchange I have described. It said the right thing, it said what I had, that was enough. And then my mother came through with her arms full of things to put in the oven and said, "Out of you two, out of the way." Which is the specific phrase she has used for 40 years when the kitchen needs to be operational and people are standing in it talking instead of helping. My father and I both moved out of the way immediately, as we have both been moving out of the way of that phrase for most of our lives. And my mother moved through the kitchen with the flour and the butter and the efficiency of a woman who has been making Thanksgiving happen for 35 years, and the card was on the refrigerator. And the horse was on the refrigerator, and the photograph of Derek's wedding was on the refrigerator, and the kitchen smelled like the Thanksgiving it had always smelled like, and I was there, and my father was there. And my mother was moving through the kitchen with purpose and competence, and that was the whole truth of the moment, and the whole truth of the moment was exactly the right size. My name is Joanna Briggs. I am 32 years old. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I study cellular membrane dynamics at a university where my father sat in the third row in March and raised his hand during the Q&A period. I am the daughter of Raymond and Ellen Briggs of Caldwell Drive in Macon, Georgia, where there is a card on the refrigerator next to a horse I drew when I was 6. I am the sister of Derek, who calls now without needing a reason. I am the woman who mailed a card from 3 miles away and ate eggs in a diner and read a book and was exactly all right. I am the woman who is still doing the arithmetic, and who has learned to let the new entries go in the ledger alongside the old ones, and who has learned that the ledger does not need to balance in order to be worth keeping. I am the easy child who stopped being easy long enough to say the true thing, and discovered that the true thing said clearly and without drama, and without requiring anyone to be the villain, has a way of landing in the right place. Not always, not without cost. But in this story, in this family, with these imperfect and real people, it landed. It is on the refrigerator. It is the right size. That is my story. That is all of it. Drop a comment below. Tell me your city and your local time. Tell me if you have ever been the easy child, the one who managed, the one who was always fine, the one who sat in the dark and did the arithmetic alone and did not say anything and kept going. Tell me what you did about it, or what you are still deciding, or what you are still in the middle of. Tell me about your card, written or not yet written, mailed or still sitting in the drawer. I read every single one. If you want more stories like this, I have left some in the description. Thank you for being here with me tonight, all the way to the end of this. It means something. I will see you in the next one. There is a conversation I had with Derek about 6 weeks after the retirement party that I have not yet described. And I want to describe it now because I think it is the most honest part of the story between the two of us, and because Derek deserves more space in this telling than I have given him. He is not a villain. He has never been a villain. He was a child who was good at something, and whose family organized itself around that thing. And he grew up inside that organization the way you grow up inside any structure, accepting it as the shape of the world, not examining it because the structure itself was never a problem for him. The structure was the problem for me, not for him. And I need to say that clearly because I think it is true and because Derek deserves the truth. We talked for almost 2 hours. He called on a Wednesday evening, which was already unusual. Derek had never been a Wednesday evening caller. He said, "Joe, I have been thinking about some things since the party." I said, "Okay." He said, "I want to tell you something and I want you to tell me if I get it wrong, because I might get it wrong on the first try." I said, "I will tell you." He said, "I think I have known for a long time that Dad paid more attention to me than to you." I said, "Yes." He said, "I think I told myself that was because of the baseball, because it was a specific and visible thing that required a specific and visible kind of support. And that it was not about me versus you, but about the activity versus not having an activity like that." I said, that is the most generous version of it. He said, I know. He said, but that is not the whole truth, is it? I said, no. He said, tell me the rest. I said, the rest is that even when the baseball was not the variable, even in the conversations that had nothing to do with baseball, even in the phone calls, even in the dinners, the attention was still not distributed evenly. He said, I know. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I benefited from that. I said, yes. He said, I did not choose it and I would not have chosen it, but I benefited from it and I did not do anything about it for a long time. I said, no. He said, I am sorry about that. I said, Derek, I need you to hear what I am about to say. He said, okay. I said, I do not need you to be sorry on behalf of a dynamic that you did not create and could not have fixed. What you can be sorry about, and what I think you are actually sorry about, is the not doing anything. The not noticing that something was happening, or noticing and not naming it, or naming it to yourself and not doing anything with the naming. That is the thing you can own, he said. Yes, that is the thing. I said, okay. He said, I want to do differently. I said, I know. I said, you already are. He said, is that enough? I said, it is a start. And a start, with 30 years of history behind it, is not nothing. He said, okay. He said, I love you, Joe. I said, I love you, Derek. We talked for another 40 minutes after that, about other things. About his kids and my research and the house in Augusta he and his wife were thinking about renovating. The conversation after the hard part was easy in the specific way of conversations that have gotten the hard part done, and can now be what they are, without the weight of the unsaid thing pressing against everything. We have talked every 3 weeks or so since then. He calls on Wednesdays sometimes. The calls are warm and specific, and occasionally about nothing in particular, which is the best kind of call. The kind that exists because the people on both ends of it want to talk, rather than because something has to be addressed. I did not know, growing up, that this version of Derek was possible. I knew the version that was organized around the baseball, that required witness and responded to attention, that occupied the available space in the house on Caldwell Drive, the way a bright, loud presence occupies available space. I did not know the version that calls on Wednesday evenings and says, I want to tell you something and I might get it wrong on the first try. That version was there all along, I think, underneath the structure that the family had built around him. What the card did, what the October phone call did, what the honest conversation did, was create the conditions under which that version could become available. Not to me as a performance for my benefit, just as a fact. As who Derek is when the structure is not requiring him to be the one who is organized around. I am glad to know him. It took 32 years and a card mailed from a post office 3 miles from a hotel ballroom, but I am glad to know him. The last thing I want to say is about the diner. The eggs and the book and the warm June morning, and the hour I sat in the booth by the window while the party happened without me. I have described it as a moment of being exactly all right, and that is true, but it is not the complete truth of the hour. The complete truth includes about 20 minutes at the beginning before the eggs arrived, when I sat in the booth and looked at the menu without reading it, and felt the specific weight of what I was doing and what I had chosen and why. I was not crying. I do not cry easily, and I was not going to cry in a diner in Macon, Georgia on a Saturday morning, but I was sitting with something. The weight of 32 years of managed invisibility. The weight of the phone call 2 nights earlier. The weight of the card I had just mailed. The weight of the party happening 3 miles away without me. And then the eggs arrived, and the coffee. And I opened the book, and the weight did not go away, but it became something I was sitting with rather than something that was sitting on me. That is the distinction that matters. The weight of 32 years of anything does not disappear in a morning. What changes is your relationship to it, whether you are under it or alongside it. Whether it is filling the room or whether there is room alongside it, for eggs and coffee and a book and an hour in a diner, and the simple, specific, uncomplicated fact of a Saturday morning in June. I had that. I had the hour. I have it still in the way that you keep hours that meant something that you can return to when you need them. The eggs in the diner, the card on the refrigerator, the third row of the lecture hall. All of it, the right size. My name is Joanna Briggs, that is my story. I will see you in the next one.